Welcome to another episode of the Lone Recruiter Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Clemenson, and today we are joined by Charles Cameron. Charles, welcome.
Thank you, Brett. Good to be with you, mate, and all those lonely recruiters out there.
Hopefully they're not too lonely anymore. Look, quick intro, right? I think most recruiters here will know who you are, okay? But just in case you've been living under a rock, Charles is the CEO of the RCSA, our governing body. As recruiters, he's also, which is what I've learned in this, in researching you, is you're also the vice president of the World Employment Confederation. You were the founder of Work Pro, and the degree you did was economics and labour law. So I can't actually think of someone who could be better fit for this job.
You say all the right things, mate.
Look, let's just start with the basics, okay? I remember when I started recruitment, people talked about the RCSA. I didn't even know what it meant. I just kind of went along with it. So, from the horse's mouth, what is the RCSA?
Rightio. So RCSA, of course, has got nothing to do with arses. It's the Recruitment Contracting Staffing Association. The reality is that we are the peak industry body. So we've got about 1,000 companies that join us, and they pay us a fee each year because they want to prove that they are better than the rest, effectively. And they do that by committing to ongoing education, committing to an overarching code of professional conduct, which they can be held to account on. They come and they get a whole heap of benefits by way of business solutions, and they love connecting with other people because they know when we come together and we join one another, we're actually better than when we work alone, mate. So that is us in a nutshell. We cover both Australia and New Zealand as well, and we've got a whole heap of individual professionals as well. But at the end of the day, we are a whole community of companies that specialise in recruitment and staffing who know that when they support one another, they're better than when they operate alone, mate.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask a very cheeky question. I go, what do you think, if the RCSA disappeared overnight, what would happen? What would happen to those companies, do you think? What would the impact be?
Look, it's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked it without me having to ask you to ask it of me, mate.
Okay.
The reason being because we need to make sure that we make a difference. Probably one of the ways I'll explain it is our number one function is to promote and protect the industry and the profession. Okay, so we're like the black ops of the industry. So you hear about a threat that's over the hill, you don't know who's going to go out and take care of it. We go over the hill, we kill bad law before it kills your business or kills your profession. So with that in mind, there are so many things that we have done to actually protect the industry, and if we didn't exist, they would be in place. And that would be, in my view, with some of the governments and the political parties that don't particularly like flexible work, they would have the imposition of huge amounts of, controls and limitations on how many workers as a percentage of a client's workforce could actually be a temporary or an on-hire worker. We would see explosions in terms of workers' compensation rates that would apply. We would see the imposition of licenses that I believe would actually really restrict where and in which industry sectors you can provide recruitment and staffing solutions. So there's some really basic examples of what happens. There's this type of thing that I call, Brett, the oh shit, how did we let this happen stuff? And a lot of people forget that we're like an insurance. The reality is that we don't just exist. We don't get any government funding. It exists because there are 1,000 companies out there who care about our industry and know that if we don't exist, slowly but surely political forces and uneducated people will try and suppress our industry, and we will not let that happen.
Hey, vote one, Charles Cameron, mate. You
Hang
got
on.
my vote. Hey, my next question, and this is actually a great segue. I'm always fascinated by what keeps people up at night, because I think that's the truth of what really it's driving them. It makes them nervous. It's what's on their mind. And so for recruiters, right, it's for us, it's deals, it's stress, it's pressure, it's shitty conversations, whatever. I'd love to understand what you wake up in the middle of the night and keeps you awake, when it comes to work.
I'll be honest with you. Number one is, how do we communicate in a world where there are so many different ways in which people receive information or don't receive information? Obviously, the Lone Recruiter is one example of the channels through which they get, relevant information. But I was sitting there with my daughter last night. She's 23. She's educated, just completed a science degree at Monash, but the only feed of information she gets on the political scene is through, I guess, social media. So, and she showed me so many different clips of basically lies, and I think we've all experienced a fair bit of that during what we've seen over in the US during the last election, and I'm seeing it roll out more and more here. And those lies, that misinformation, equally applies to what we do as an industry and as a profession, the value we do bring and we don't bring. So for me, it's the mix of how do we get honest, true information out through to the people that actually matter, rather than misinformation. That's the stuff keeping me up at night at the moment, mate.
Have you got a resolve on that? Have you gone, this is the channel we're going to stick to? Because it's for me, it's almost like, do you go hard on one channel and just go, this is where you're going to get it all, or do you go to everything? And it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Look, I don't think we're at TikTok yet. I think that's a tough one. It's got to be absolutely real. Look, the reality is that we're probably blessed in the fact that LinkedIn is an awesome way in which people can source candidates and can source clients and do marketing. It's probably the number one way in which information is received. But I think you would appreciate LinkedIn is getting more and more commercial advertising content. It's really hard to sift out the real from the commercial. To that extent, we had shortlists that actually closed their doors recently, and love it or hate it, the reality is that was another key source of information that people would rely upon. So that's gone as well. So again, it's got to be a mix, mate. It's a complete blend, and we can't simply rely upon one way to communicate.
Yeah, okay. Mate, you've already covered so many bases, and because how long have you been in this gig for?
I've been in this gig for 8 years, mate. 8 years. So
okay.
So 8 years beyond my use by date, but I still love it because I absolutely care for this industry and fundamentally believe, this is why I do what I do, Brett. I fundamentally believe that labour market intermediaries, recruiters, staffing firms improve lives, both of clients, of individuals, and the power of that flows through family, communities, you name it. The reality is that we can deliver so much good, but we can also really F up people's lives as well, which is why we exist too.
If you look at when you came in, because you didn't recruit before, did you? You were kind of in and around employment law, and you were kind of, it looks like you like labour law, you had work process, you've always been around it, right?
I've never recruited, but what I did do is, before I went out and became a consultant specialising in servicing this industry, I thought, gee, we don't need another consultant who's never worked within the sector. So I actually went out, I was at Australian Industry Group, I left and I actually went out and spent a couple of years working with IPA personnel, and it was absolutely instrumental in terms of what I think I do now and why I understand, and I hopefully get it for a lot of people, which is it's a commercial model that we need to understand, and money drives most things. It's fair and it's okay to say our members make profit. Okay, they make jobs. I went in there and spent 2 years and learned so much about the industry, and probably the thing that sort of struck me out of that was a bloke called David Fowler, who owned IPA where I was working, and he said, Charles, never forget that there are so many busy fools in recruitment and staffing. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, those companies that have huge amounts of work, but they actually don't make any profit, okay? So they're working with bad clients, bad sectors and otherwise. And then again, that's what drives me to make sure you say no to bad business in this industry, because otherwise we're not making money and we're actually creating huge amounts of problems because you can't sustain good services, mate.
Totally. So in your 8 years, at the post of the RCSA, as CEO, you would have seen a hell of a lot. I would suggest that 8 years ago, the landscape and the environment and just how we operated and where recruitment was to now, it's quite different, right? You've almost got two very distinct chapters, pre-COVID and post-COVID now. What do you think have been some of those big shifts you've seen since you started to where we are today? And where do you think the next shifts are going?
It's funny. I wouldn't say it's changed that much, to be quite honest with you. I wish it had changed a bit more, to be honest, Brett. I think, and the reason I say that is not to disparage the way in which the industry's operated, but look, maybe naively, I mean, I came in thinking that we can really move the industry from being, simply people who find and place, great candidates and manage them well to actually being workforce management consultants and providing a far more, management consulting style of offering. But the reality is that the money is to be made by finding great people and placing great people, receiving your commissions and managing them effectively. The thing that definitely has changed is there's a hell of a lot more regulation. So you might say, Charles, have you really done your job of, the black ops of recruitment? Well, absolutely. I think it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And I think most of us understand that there are certain political parties there that have allegiances with union movements. Unions don't like people who move around because they can't make them members. So therefore we try and actually shut down these types of companies. And if we weren't there to stop them, then there would be a whole heap more regulation there. The other thing, of course, which naturally has changed is just the amount of technology. And I actually think we're going to see a bigger impact from this most recent, what I'd call almost downturn, or certainly a suppression of the market, than what we saw during COVID. And the reason being that we're seeing artificial intelligence and we're seeing new ways in which businesses are thinking, whoa, do we actually need to go back to that recruitment company to find our people, or can we start playing with doing it ourselves? So this is the great challenge for us. If we're not really staying ahead of them, because the greatest competitor to recruitment agencies is in fact the client and in-housing it, I actually think we're going to see a real, restriction of the market moving forward, Brett. So it's a really interesting time, and I think a lot of companies are still out there in the wow rather than how phase of artificial intelligence and otherwise. So yeah, I think nothing surprising here, but the technology and the insourcing is probably the biggest threat that we're going to see coming up.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I don't have a segue for this, but I'm just going to jump straight into it. May 22nd, TalentX. It's going to be in Sydney. Let's talk about this. When you pull something like this together, I'd love to understand, where do you start? Do you start with like a core theme? Maybe that's the link there. Is it AI, or do you just think, like I was told by John, one of the guys helping you guys pull this event together, that we just want everyone who's anyone in recruitment to be part of the party. Like we want everyone who's anyone to be there. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I quite like that. But I'd love your take on that. When you pull something like this together, where do you start? What do you look for? And what do you hope people to get out of it?
Yeah, well, it could have been the perfect segue for you, mate, because TalentX actually started out.
I'll cut that.
I mean, TalentX started out as what was called Texpo, and John should be absolutely credited for sort of creating this, which was all about a technology expo for recruitment firms, and it's still very heavily dependent upon the latest in technology, whether it's technological innovations internally, whether it's automation, which of course, as we all know, is different to artificial intelligence. And it was basically providing an opportunity for people to mix with great vendors and RCSA partners to get ahead of the rest. It then evolved, and we did want to make it a festival. And I don't know how old you are, mate, but there used to be a great gig that would travel around. I think it was in Sydney. I'm a Melbourne boy, called the Big Day Out. And John's a muso. I love music.
Oh, mate, I've went to about 6 of those things. I see all these things popping up from the 2000s with like Blink and Muse and like Metallica, and you go, I was there. The best.
I know.
Yeah.
Watch out. We better bring a boiler room to TalentX, I reckon. God, lost a fair bit of weight dancing in that room. But so for those who aren't fully aware of it, it was basically I think a couple of days, wasn't it, where you could actually go around and you could actually see all the best bands, and there'd be multiple stages. So again, nothing that unique in the modern world where we have festivals, but the idea was to create more than one particular presentation. So, and I guess you get that a little bit at conferences where you have breakout sessions, but the idea was to have 3 simultaneous stages all running at the same time. And we knew that we didn't want it just to be relevant to leaders in the industry, because we've got SHAPE for that. So SHAPE is the RCSA conference. conference. That'll be in August on the Gold Coast, more aimed at leaders, owners, senior executive managers, and of course some up-and-comers in the consultant world, but normally around 350 to 500 people. We wanted to actually democratise, the enjoyment of recruitment and the knowledge and all that sort of stuff. We also thought to ourselves, the way in which people want to learn is far more interactive these days. So we actually want to create a festival where you could come. You've got a billing stage, because again, if you're not billing, you're not making money and you can't sustain the business. It's a big one. We've got an ops stage and a compliance stage, of course, which is all for those back office people. Really, really important. Again, if you haven't got the back office people, the front office people can't really get along, and you can't count the beans. And then you've got your leadership stage as well, and motivation stage. So the whole idea was to actually create this constant day-long festival where we could also attract, Brett, more of those people who are in the earlier stage of their career, not just the leaders. So it's really designed for everything from a startup recruiter, okay, right through to your general managers. Of course, we have a lot of CEOs who get along there as well, but ultimately it's to try and bring it to the people. And again, you don't have to travel to Byron Bay, you don't have to travel to Port Douglas to get there. We took it. It's Melbourne, Sydney, altering years. So again, it's about bringing the music, the fun, the entertainment, but most importantly, the knowledge which we need to operate effectively to real recruiters, mate.
Well, mate, that is the best pitch for that for TalentX I've ever heard, and who better than Charles? But I'm excited to be involved. Where we've been invited along to enjoying the festivities, so we were excited for that, which is why I brought Charles on, just to give us the blurb. And to be honest, selfishly, I just want to learn more about the RCSA and the conference itself. I will leave us with one thought, okay? For anyone who's in Sydney or thinking of coming to Sydney for the May 22nd, 2025 TalentX conference, I want to beat Melbourne. I hear Melbourne's, last time we did this in Melbourne, was 800 odd people attended. Is this right?
Yeah, that's spot on, mate.
Yep. And I think our capacity in Sydney is 1,000. So I want to sell out. Big Day Out was never good unless it was sold out. So let's sell it out. That is my
goal. We have to do better than that, because we sold out last year, mate. So if you Sydney-siders think you can beat us Mexicans, then you better do better than sell out. And we can actually do more than 1,000 this year. So okay. I think it's sort of 1,400. So why don't you set yourself a real goal and get to that level? And if you're thinking about coming along, some of the presenters, which again, we're trying to think differently about who's come along. So Brittany Saunders, Faith the Label, is going to be presenting and just bringing a new, context to what it means to be a business owner as well. So she's been awesome, and I can't wait to see her. Got Chris Helder, which is all about mindset, making sure that you've got the right mindset, because again, it can be a pretty tough game, as you would know, and all those lonely recruiters out there, mate, who listen to you would understand. Aisling Smith, a neurodiversity expert, is going to talk about how do you tap in and make sure we maximise all those candidates who come from neurodiversity as well. And there are so many others, a whole heap of people from, one of the other things we heard, people from within industry around how to bill effectively. Another session, which I love the idea of, is how to sell without selling, because again, as you would know, selling's about relationships, it's building up, and I'm a big one for don't just come to me when you want to sell me something. So again, there's so many, there'll be 40 different presentations in one day. So mate, awesome. I reckon you guys can smash 800.
I love it. You hear that, Sydney?
And if you don't, I'll never come to Sydney again.
That's our challenge. Mate, appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. We'll put all the links below in this episode, wherever you're consuming this. You'll know where to get tickets. You'll know. Don't worry. We'll shout it loud, far and wide.
Thanks so much for having me on, Brett.
Mate, absolute pleasure. Guys, like, share, subscribe. It really helps us grow. It's going to help the RCSA. It's going to help Charles. As always, have an amazing day, and may all your deals come true.